expertise and knowledge. So we have refocused on some presentation. Now, who we have here? We have representatives from all range from of the coffee value chain. We have representatives from traders, roasters. We have representatives from association. We have representatives from India. So we have a very rich range of expertise and knowledge. So in the list, and there is no specific list, but just the way they are presented here, we have, first of all, our friend Trishul Mandana is the managing director of World Cafe, so one of the leading coffee trading company in the world, and please, a round of applause for him to be with us. Then we have Juan Esteban Orduz. I think nobody doesn't know him, everybody knows him. He's the president of the Colombia Coffee Federation. Yes. Of North America, yes. In case you have the microphone to speak. Then we have also the privilege from Unilever here, Mandeep Shintuli. He's the procurement head, but very much engaged in sustainability. And I think he has a lot of experience, a lot of way to contribute to this discussion. And again, Amit Pant, Senior Vice President of Tata Coffee. Tata Coffee is one of the sponsors here. We have been listening to some of your colleagues there. We have a very interesting discussion before. He has a lot to contribute to this discussion. Thank you. Then, as I said, still in the same panel, we have Mario Cerruti, who is from Lavazza, but here has a different hat. He's representing the European Coffee Federation, and he's the one that will be giving some highlights about one of the regulations, that's the one on deforestation. Okay, Mario, thank you. Ramesh, the president of the Coffee Export Association on India, from Bangalore, and also, friends. We've been also the opportunity to have a lot of interesting discussion, and this will be sharing with you. Monsieur Anselme Gouton, then is there on my left. He's the president of ACRAM, who is the African Madagascar Robusta Coffee Agency. Monsieur Gouton, merci, bienvenue. He's going also to have some highlights on more broader change in regulation. The reason is, when we prepare for this panel, there was the interest not to focus on one regulation, but on changing environment. So agrochemicals, due diligence. So there are a number of things happening in the sector. We want to understand with you why they're there, what they're for, what are the issues, how to solve it. And finally, this is on the left. The extreme left, this is Michael Buki, is based in India. He's from the European Commission. He's the head of the economic sessions here in India. Thank you, Michael. Now, as I say, the question, we wanted to start in a more general way to go then to a more specific way, focus on the discussion. Here, what we know that the challenges of coffee trade are there. We want to discuss how the coffee value chain is evolving. As I say, the market in general. Of course, demand and supply are the key to determine the distribution, the value, the volatility, and the governance in the supply chain. So we know there are a number of factors affecting this. We've been also hearing here these days. One is, changing the climate. We know recently how this has been always affecting. If you've been the other day, we see the evolution of prices in the coffee sector. This is a common thing for agricultural-based commodities, big volatility. And of course, this has an impact on all the actors, but specifically on farmers. The second point, this is related to what systems are in place to manage the supply chain. And the third one is what strategy are needed to make the trading more sustainable. Now, I will start with a round of questions, having in mind, I say we have a large audience with different expertise. So try to be also very clear. And I want to start, as we discuss, from Trishul. Please, you want to go there, you want to take the microphone, you have the microphone. Give us your view about what is changing, what is happening, and what is affecting this evolution.
I think it would be good to have. I think it would be good to have the questions up on the board if you can.
Can you put the questions? Okay, here they are.
It's the previous slide.
I can give it to you, even like this.
I think it's the previous slide where we talked about the coffee industry and other commodities being affected by a cycle of high and low price fluctuations. Is it climate related, and how is it impacting your business or the country? How do you mitigate risk, and how to help small farmers? There are lots of questions in this. In my view, the two fundamental facts that are impacting coffee prices today is related to fluctuation of production in the world's largest producing country, which is Brazil. And then you say, why is that happening? One would basically argue that this is climate related, theoretically, bearing in mind that a lot of Brazilian coffee is in a temperate region. But let's just say the number one reason that we are seeing fluctuations in price has to do with weather, and weather in Brazil in particular. You can talk about weather in every other country that's producing coffee, but it is somewhat meaningless in the context of the size and scale of Brazil. So from that perspective, I would say climate and weather in Brazil is one very, very important factor. The second factor that is impacting prices, which is happening here, now, and today, has to do with how roasters look at what they want to give their consumers. And so in short, if you have a situation where roasters are trying to cut cost, and we are seeing that here today because of the current environment of a combination of inflation and a recessionary environment, means that roasters are moving to cheaper products, and the cheaper products very clearly include higher Robusta usage and also higher Brazil usage. And these are the two primary factors that are driving price in my mind. So it's not just climate related. How is it impacting our business? Yes, it is impacting all of us in very different ways. I think what I am most concerned about what I have seen in the last 12 to 18 months, we have seen prices globally over $2 in New York, with very high prices, especially for washed Arabica coffees. So in my mind, the washed Arabica coffee farmer has seen a very handsome price in the last 18 months or 2 years post a weather event in Brazil, which was, as many people know, we had 2 frosts and a drought in Brazil. The challenge that I see is, in this high price environment, we really didn't see a supply side response from the Arabica farmers, the washed Arabica farmers. So washed Arabica production remained constant, and they didn't really take advantage of that higher price environment.
Okay.
And now, where we are here today, Brazil, in fact, has reacted to that high price environment. And when you combine the higher production of Brazil with the fact that the roasters are looking to move to a cheaper product, what we have seen in the last 3 to 4 months has been an incredible shift into Robusta and to Brazil unwashed naturals. And clearly what we have seen, which is very disturbing for me, is a very significant reduction of the price of washed Arabica coffees. In my view, that's not going to change anytime soon, rather sadly. So from that point of view, yes, I have huge concerns, just like I think a lot of people that are in these washed producing countries, in terms of what it means for the future of these countries. it carries all sorts of risk for us. The bigger the production in 2 countries and the smaller the production in washed Arabica countries, it makes everything from our own operations to the way in which we can manage price risk in New York very, very challenging. And then finally, how to help smallholder farmers, which I think what most people want to hear about. I won't lie, it is very, very challenging because ultimately the answer lies in the smaller holder becoming significantly more efficient or receiving assistance. Or my personal favorite theory on this is that if you, let's say, force or encourage, maybe is the better word, roasters to start using more washed Arabicas in their blends, I think that's one way in which you counter the reduction in these values. One of the theories that I've espoused more than once is if you are basically buying a shirt anywhere in Europe and you have to basically find a label saying whether it's manufactured in India, in Colombia, or in Bangladesh, whatever, why can't roasters be obliged to actually say where they're sourcing their product in order to put it on the shelf? So you can well imagine if roasters are obliged to actually put that data on their packs in the shelf, it is then going to create an uncomfortable reality for them in terms of pressure, let's just say, from environmental groups to say, okay, why are you not buying coffee from Guatemala or Colombia or India? And that creates a real demand in my mind for these origins, and it's one way in which I think we can see or achieve higher prices for wash producers. Today, I think it's pointless asking roasters and consumers to demand more coffee. What we really need to help, in my mind, are the small holders that are struggling in this price environment, not necessarily very efficient farmers. And we need to be very clear. And sometimes, in my mind, the world's not very clear on that theory. I'll pass it on.
Okay. Well, thank you, Trishul. I know you, and I know what the focus on this. Now, of course, we are also weighed by the antitrust, so we cannot talk about prices specifically. We have here an interesting combination who, in the value chain, has a different roles. And again, going back to the main theme is there are this volatility, and one way is you are in between the farmers and the roasters, so you have your perspective. But of course, in the part of the chain, they all are affected by that. So maybe taking from this, who would like to? And then I have a producer country. We have Colombia, and then we have number of roasters. You have the exporters. How you see? But I say, the key point is this volatility is there and depends on different factors, as you say. Some is because of the size of the different origin, by the climate, and some other factors. That's given, right? The point is how this combination of what kind of the roaster decide to blend in the coffee, it's something that I don't know if you're willing to discuss. But what I'm more interested in say, what is with the farmers? Because they are the one, at the end of the day, they are more affected in their own life, on a daily life, about this volatility. Now, from an industry view, please,
Thank you, Gerardo. Just to add to what Trishul said, while he captured very well the upstream risks which farmers face and intermediaries face, I will focus the next few minutes on processed coffee. Okay. A quarter of the world's trade today, and we are talking about challenges in coffee trade, yes, is soluble coffee, right? And soluble coffee by itself is exposed to all the risks that Trishul mentioned, because 60% of your cost is bean coffee, right? So the risks on price, the risks on climate, the risks on counterparties, all the possible volatilities that he spoke about, you're exposed to that. And in addition, you have a very, very dynamic regulatory environment to tackle.
Okay.
So if you look at the way things have changed over the last few years on, say, agrochemical residues or food safety, food hygiene, this is something which has kept the producers around the world on toes. And it adds to the challenges that you see today in the world of coffee production. Especially when you're a B2B producer, you are participating in the world trade. You today find that the laws change more rapidly than the capacities which are built on the ground to take care of those challenges, right? If we have a change as far as, a regulation on food safety is concerned, or say residue limits change, we have to necessarily give first ample amount of time for origins and producers to see whether the capacity is there or the relevant education is there for them to come up to speed. Secondly, things like, the challenge when regulation is different for different parts of the world. So what's a specific regulation, what it might mean to you in, say, the European Union, would not be true for other parts of the world. So a producer like us has different challenges when you address different market segments around the world. And this is something that we have been grappling with over the past 5 to 10 years, because the scene has been changing in a very, very dynamic manner, right? And I would strongly urge, when you look at situations like this, we have to first build capacities on the ground before you change regulations. Because you do it faster than the producers or the origins, you always have a challenge in terms of keeping up.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think Ramesh wants to add something on that. And just to recap, you say that the changing regulatory environment is a key factor that is affecting it's a significant challenge. Okay. Now, I think the micro is not on. Let's see if that worked. I don't know. I'll try to. No. Okay. Go ahead, Ramesh.
I would address
No?
the issues raised by Trishul.
Can you hear him? No. I don't know. Mike, why don't you go there? This one. Okay. It's okay. I take it.
I hope I'm audible. I think there seems to be a conspiracy to silence me, but anyway, I'll address both what Trishul said about price and what Amit said about the agrochemicals and MRL in one. See, the price is obviously impacting the grower, but the grower has very little choice in a change. It's not, see, coffee is a perennial crop. You cannot just change from one crop to the other at a very short notice. It's also grown at a higher elevation where you have very little choice of what crop you can grow. But I think in India, at least, you can see that there has been a shift away from Arabica towards Robusta, which seems to be in line with what Trishul is saying about the market. So the growers are responding in a very slow manner to the need for more Robusta than there is for Arabica. Now, I would hate to call it a cheaper coffee. I just say it's a different coffee, because I've always held that Robusta is not inferior to Arabica. I grow Robusta and Arabica, so
Okay, so you know both.
I cannot say anything negative about Robusta, but so you see a change is coming. Now, whether it's good for the market, bad for the market, as a grower you cannot, but the grower is hurting. What is obvious is with these changes, is the grower is hurting. The second point, leading further what he said, which he did not elaborate, was the concentration of production in two countries, in one or two countries, is dangerous. You saw what happened when entire manufacturing industry concentrated in one particular country. And when there's a supply shock, it goes causing a recession. So I think it's not ideal that we have production concentrated in just a couple of countries. So I think we need to look at that. Okay. The second point, I'd like to add to what Amit said about, okay, another thing which you did not want to mention was the track and trace. See, now track and trace is being applied on the grower. With the new regulations, they're saying put in track and trace so you can track from which farm it comes. But being fair to both sides, should the track and trace also not apply to the roaster? I know Mario would not agree with this. He was shaking his head vigorously when Trishul said it. But that's one point. But main point I was talking about agrochemicals. Now, a farmer is forced to use agrochemicals for various reasons. In India, we use very little agrochemicals and not a big issue. But you will see that in the European Union, just for an example, almost all agricultural commodities, they fix the maximum residue limit at 0.01 ppm or less. Now, here I would like to quote, with Mario's permission, an old ECF, European Coffee Federation paper, where they mentioned glyphosate, for example. Now, glyphosate, which we all know is a herbicide, in the case of coffee, is 0.01 ppm. But in the case of rice, is 0.2 ppm, which is, 0.1 ppm, which is 10 times higher. So the residue limit is permitted in rice 10 times higher than in coffee, and 20 times higher for oat and barley. Now, the consumption of coffee, as per the ECF paper, is about 30 grams. But the consumption of rice per day is 200 to 300 grams. So you're consuming more rice and less coffee, but the permissible limit for rice is higher than coffee. So that forces you to think, are we really addressing a toxicological standard, or is it something else? Because if it is poisonous, it should be equally poisonous for rice or wheat. In fact, the limit should be lower for rice and wheat than it is for coffee. So I think the problem is that the EU standards for pesticide residues, or agrochemicals, glyphosate is not a pesticide but a herbicide, is based on hazard, not based on risk. So what you're asking for, my solution, which may not be agreeable to the other panelists, but I think that all these limits should be based on the risk-based and not hazard-based. So the EU has openly admitted is hazard-based, whereas Codex Alimentarius, which was the standard earlier, is based on risk. So I would say that, one, the limit should be based on risk and not on hazard. The second point is that what again Amit said about the frequent changes. Now, if you look in June, July of last year, that is in 2022, the EU changed the residue limits 50 times in 42 days. So I don't know how scientific studies could be done that you could do 50 changes in 42 days. So I think that, and okay, further, I don't know how many of you are familiar with a very harmful chemical called imidacloprid. It's not used in coffee, but it was on the prohibited list till recently. Now, EU has permitted the use of imidacloprid for a temporary period. And glyphosate, despite its known harmful effects, is still not banned. So you have these frequent changes. So I think the reason they're given for allowing a banned chemical was that we need to wait till a suitable alternative is found. So I think that we should not just keep changing it. We should wait. If you find something is toxicologically not safe, we should give them time to develop an alternative and not change the rules so frequently. So I'm sorry it took up a lot of time, but I shall not address the other issues.
Thank you very much for your clarification. Now let's move to the other side of the table, to also from the producer side, and then see comment, because there are a lot of issues here that we brought in. So let's see what the large world producers telling us on this and their reaction.
Thank you everyone. it's much easier to speak like this. So that's why I do it. In November of 2021, you may recall that there was the meeting of the COP27, or I think it was in Glasgow. And Tom Friedman wrote a column in the New York Times saying, I don't know, it's kind of wants to kill you, this thing. The New York Times, and he used the title of a book for his column that said, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And every time I think of that title, I think of what we are facing right now. When Gerardo sent me the questions about the panel, I thought, okay, we have to talk about volatility and we have to talk about regulation. So how do those connect? So, although my son claims that I have a teenage son who claims that I am old-fashioned, almost obsolete, I said, okay, I may be obsolete. There are much smarter people than me in this panel. So I will check with ChatGPT. I will ask the question to ChatGPT. So I asked the question in many forms and ways. What causes price volatility in coffee? Weather conditions, crop diseases, global supply and demand, current exchange rates, geopolitical factors, market speculation, economic factors like inflation and those factors. They said it's market information, news and information that comes that is publicly available, and environmental concerns. It said, now we're connecting dots. Good. So it said, growing awareness of sustainability and ethical sourcing practices can affect prices as consumers and companies seek out coffee produced under specific environmental and social conditions. Sounds interesting. So then I said, okay, now ChatGPT gave me in many ways, forms and shapes, the same answer. And then asked in the second question, in different ways. But the nutshell is how to deal with coffee price volatility. Then it said, diversify suppliers. Oops, Trishul. Oops, diversify suppliers. So you don't get the Colombian, get the Honduran, get the Brazilian, fine. One big red flag here. Hedging, managing inventory, long-term contracts, cost control, price adjustments, consumer education, market research, and alternative ingredients also connected. Alternative ingredients meaning coffee or not coffee, or meaning Arabica versus Robusta. So back to a conversation we had with Trishul this morning. So now we have two things, and we connect the dots. So price volatility has to do with the environment, has to do with responsible sourcing, and has to do with the regulation. Because if regulations are issued that can affect supply and can affect the situation of farmers and can prevent products to enter major markets, there will be a consequence in price. And we're talking about 25 million people that grow coffee in the world, and live off coffee. It's more than 120 million people all over the world, many of them here in India. We're talking about 70% of them are smallholder farmers. And we're also talking about that coffee is produced between the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer, which is where most of the climate change is happening. So I thought it's kind of funny that developed world wants to fight climate change by punishing people who are in the most affected area of climate change. So again, who's paying the bill? Of course, the farmers. This was one of the conclusion. And then I had the dots completely connected. I said, Gerardo's a genius. He just gave us two apparently unrelated questions that are completely connected. And that's a big concern that we have. And I will not go into what we're talking about the deforestation regulation in Europe, but there are many other regulations and many others will come. The question is what to do with that and how to deal with that. And I'm going to propose a solution in the end, which is what you want us to do. I'm going to have a little proposal, but let me ask you a question. What happens? Assume that each of you is a coffee farmer. Our CEO, Germán Bamón, he is a coffee farmer himself. And you get for some reason you cannot get certified for deforestation. So your coffee cannot go into the EU. And your main customer is the EU. So what do? You can do, I guess, two things. You can switch products and maybe tear down the coffee trees and put cattle, which is going to have an even worse consequence on the environment than was intended. Or maybe you will sell your coffee very cheap to another market. So you will go to some place, not the US, let's say the US. So, and this is something we discussed with Trucio. Trucio, the one who, I'm going to give you the credit for this. He's the one who brought this up. He said, if I'm an Ethiopian farmer and my coffee cannot go to Europe, which is my main market, what do? I will sell it very cheap in the US. What is that going to do if that happens in a massive way? That's going to take down prices for everybody, including Colombians. And this is not the issue about Africans versus Latin Americans and so on, but this is a situation that's very concerning. We're all very happy with saving the environment. The Americans have a saying which I always use, which is that saving the forest is motherhood and apple pie. No one can be against it. No one. The question is not if we're going to do it. The question is how. How can we make sure that how can Europe make sure, and we as a coffee value chain, that we protect the environment, we make sure there's no more deforestation, but is that going to happen at the expense of the farmers? At the expense of ruining the farmers? How is that proposition going to work out? I understand there's a good intention. I know that the European Union is working on how to implement this. If you ask me, from what I have gathered talking to a lot of people in Europe and in the coffee market and so on, they have no clue yet. Not because they are not capable of doing it, but because it's a difficult task, and you have to spend more time on the ground and seeing what's happening in the farms, what's happening in producing countries. That is very important. So at this point, we have a legislation from the European Parliament. We have a regulation that says what has to be done. We don't know exactly how it has to be done and what the consequences will be, and we're less than a year and a half away. And for all of you who are in the coffee value chain, this is nothing, this is 2 seconds. We're less than 1.5 years away from the legislation to be in place. So how are we going to deal with this? It's going to be very difficult. So what we've been saying, what my proposal is, we need to get the European Union to have like a buffer period for this to be seriously thought, that the implementation has to be thought in a much serious manner. Producing countries, I mean, they get closer to producing countries, see what happens on the ground and what's feasible and what is not. And after that, we can apply the legislation. Because if not, I'm going to quote partially Tom Friedman away. In this case, everybody will want to go to heaven, but someone else is going to have to die. So my recommendation is, let's be serious about this, give some time, and let's give producers time to adapt to the adaptation. Thank you.
Very interesting.
Can I just add?
Just the comments. Can you hear me? No. Can you reconnect before speaking? Well, first of all, I think we all want to eat the apple pie, but not all together, otherwise it'll get sick, so we have to be careful on that. But before I give because I think Pradeep wanted to say something, if I allow, and I think I want to give the opportunity to everybody to speak. Of course, also you have to make sure that when I eat, there is some regulatory elements in that, because you can eat, 10 apple pie and get sick. So also, I think your parents try to educate you to eat properly. So that is also an element to be considered. But Pradeep, please.
I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
So first of all, thanks for having us here, and I must compliment Juan for doing the chat GPT suggestions on price volatility, and And by the way, I think it's all right. So that we must also compliment the research behind ChatGPT. Most of what is said is absolutely right. So coming to the issue of the price volatility, and I think Trishul really touched upon it beautifully when he basically started to talk about the supply issues. And I think it's indeed correct that a lot of what is to do with price volatility today is in relation to the availability, and we are seeing it, we are observing it, and I think the main important point, I would not like to repeat what the others have said, but the main important point is that it's here and now. It's no longer an issue on resilience, which is going to happen, say, few years from now. We are clearly observing it in all the agri commodities in which we play, that this is impacting us here and now, and we need to really address the challenges behind it. So I would just like to sort of give a few examples, because a lot has been said about coffee, but what we do in tea, we started close to around 10 years back when we founded the Trustee Code along with several other suppliers as well as consumers. And we basically have been doing a lot of work to improve the sustainability in the tea plantations in Assam, West Bengal and South India. So what we have been able to do is that we have been able to get the industry to almost 65% certification. And it's very important because it really sets the tone for what is there to come. And it's important that because it addresses the concerns around the transparency, it addresses the concerns around the availability, and it's a lot about smallholders, because if you see even in tea, it's quite similar. Close to around 50% of the production in tea is happening from the smallholders, and we really need to make sure that the yields which they are getting are improving. So we have been working on a number of projects to improve the yields of the smallholders there, and we have got some very good results. So I think that's something which we really must continue to do, continue to drive, continue to support them with all the technological expertise which all the big companies have, because I think that's the only way. So once we get that corrected, it's very, very clear that we'll be able to solve all these availability issues. The other thing I think which is also important is the different yields, because if you compare the yields across the various producing countries in coffee, you will find that there is a lot of variations and fluctuations which happen. And I think it's all about benchmarking, learning from the best practices in the various producing countries. And if we can really equalize the yields across the various countries, I think that gives a tremendous opportunity for us to improve upon the supply situation, and this can be indeed a low-hanging fruit which is there. So these are some of the points which I wanted to talk about, especially to improve the availability, because it is going to have a direct correlation on the price volatility. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Just I'm trying to reorganize this. Now, you want threshold. I think you wanted to comment something. And I'm trying
I just want to pick up on. I just wanted to pick up on what Juan Esteban.
I can't hear you.
Hello.
Go ahead.
When I started my initial comments, I said two things really impact the world in terms of coffee prices. One was what happens in Brazil, and the other was how roasters basically may change their consumption patterns with more robustas, for example. Juan Esteban touched on the third thing, which I just want to point out. This is something that has been enacted, but the impact on prices are, in my opinion, yet to be felt. And for that audience that's here in India, it's quite, I found it quite surprising. This topic of EUDR, which is regulation, is still not very well understood by the audience. And I made a comment in Switzerland last week when I was talking at a panel to say that EUDR, whilst it's been, and it's like you described it as apple pie, it's who can argue about not basically addressing the topic of deforestation. This is noble. But at the same point, I don't think the policymakers have fully understood the impact on the smallholder. And the comment I made in Switzerland was I think this could be potentially catastrophic for the small producer. And why I mean it can be catastrophic is if the producer doesn't get prepared, the governments or the origins don't help the origin get prepared, the traders basically don't have support to make sure that they're preparing the origin, it could lead to a very significant decline in the value of those coffees as they struggle to find markets outside of Europe. Europe does consume 30% of the world's, or more than 30% of the world's coffee. I haven't looked at the latest Indian statistics, but it is, I think, more than 50%. So you can well imagine that if India is not prepared, given our Indian audience here, it can have a pretty devastating impact on the differential. So this, I'm saying, is something that's in the future yet to come. And it's something that, you know, everyone needs to be very well prepared for. And I second the comments of Juan Esteban, where the policymakers have reacted to pressure from their constituents to enact legislation. But unfortunately, the same policymakers haven't fully understood the implication on some of the poorest people in the coffee chain. And my biggest fear is that it will dramatically impact the poorest people in the coffee chain and put them out of business if we are not careful. So I would call upon the authorities, in this particular case here in India, the Coffee Board, and of course in all of the origin countries which are perhaps maybe ignoring EUDR. And I have basically been in a few countries where I think there's some combination of either disbelief or this will not happen or how are we going to do it. The reality is that legislation has been enacted. That ship has sailed. So now then the question is, should these origin countries be helping their farmers? Should these origin countries be putting funds to basically help the farmers? How do we actually collect the data? How can we collect the data efficiently? Because you can well imagine if you have a country where it's very expensive to map all the farmers, that again puts it at a disadvantage to a large country that's able to collect the data very easily. So in short, this needs to happen at the origin countries, and I would agree with Juan Esteban. I think European policymakers need to understand the impact on the poorest farmers and then also help them prepare getting ready for this legislation, not just say, okay, it's a, you know, this is it, you deal with it, not understanding the consequences on the small producer.
Okay. Thank you so much. Now, as we are saying, we are trying to provide, now, I think it's becoming clear what are the issues. We have an advantage because some of the presenters, the speakers here have some more highlight on that to go into the more specific about the regulations. Also because we have a large audience, so they may be fully aware or not of the details. Now, you brought a number of them. So while we were discussing, the idea is we ask Monsieur Gouton, who can give us, let's say, an highlights of the changing regulatory framework, so in a broader term. And then we have the European Coffee Federations, who is, you know, is a party in this. It's not the regulator, but it's also the industry that is affected from upstream of the value chain. So ECF, we will see from their point of view how they see the regulation. And then we start to go to dive down to see what are the key elements that you already described, and the solutions are very much related. Also because, I say, it is a broad audience and we wanted to go that. If you agree, then we can ask Monsieur Gouton. I think the presentation is in English, yes, and but he will speak in French. So if you need, take your own your device. I say we have both. You know, they're very brilliant. You have the slides in English et vous avez la présentation en français. Vas-y. Alors, est-ce que vous devez le faire ou je le fais moi-même pour changer le slide? Ok.
Bien, merci.
Okay.
You know that it's very easy for me to make my intervention in French. They tell me that you have many interpretation and many language. Bien, merci Monsieur Patakone.
Je vous là pour vous aider.
On va donner la parole là, à ce stade de nos interventions. Donc, comme je l'ai dit justement, je ferai ma présentation en français. Donc, je demanderai à ceux qui ne sont pas bilingues de prendre leur casque pour mieux comprendre ce que je vais faire comme présentation. Donc, il s'agit bien entendu de l'impact de l'évolution du cadre réglementaire et des obstacles au commerce mondial du café.
C'est bien.
Donc,
Excusez-moi, mais il faut le mettre là.
Ah bon, d'accord. Je suis assez grande taille aussi, également.
Pardon.
Bien, alors donc, en fait, le plan de l'exposé serait tout simple. Hein. Donc, dans un premier temps, je parlais de l'évolution, bien entendu, du cadre réglementaire et des défis subséquents. Et ensuite, dans un deuxième temps, je ferai des propositions pour vous permettre d'être très à l'aise sur ce que je vais présenter. Si, bien entendu, M. Patakone me le permet, parce que c'est tellement qu'il va me poser cette question, j'aimerais anticiper déjà sur la réponse. Donc, comme vous le savez, le mes slide.
Oui.
Donc, comme vous le savez, justement, bon, le café vraiment reste encore un produit de grande spéculation. Nous sommes conscients, justement, de l'importance économique de ce café, mais je prendrai plutôt l'aspect qui relève de nos producteurs, qui sont extrêmement dépendants de ce produit, qui occupe une place prépondérante sur le marché international. Nous connaissons bien entendu tout ce que ça rapporte aux pays importateurs, mais au détriment, permettez-moi de le dire, au détriment des pays exportateurs. Donc, malheureusement encore, on se retrouve confronté à l'évolution d'un cadre réglementaire qui est tellement contraignant pour nos pays exportateurs, dont le pays producteur. Et ces obstacles ont nécessairement un impact non négligeable, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, sur le commerce mondial du café. Je vous parlerai dans un premier temps de l'évolution alors de ce cadre réglementaire et des défis subséquents. Donc, la réglementation sur la sécurité sanitaire du café, évidemment, défi de s'assurer de la qualité et de l'inocuité du café. Respect des normes de sécurité alimentaire. Respect, bien entendu, aussi des limites maximales de contaminants. Respect aussi des normes sanitaires et phytosanitaires. Il y a aussi le défi de traçabilité, qui a aussi un aspect qui fragilise encore beaucoup plus nos producteurs au détriment des pays qu'on appelle pays consommateurs, qui, bien entendu, tuent l'essentiel de la traçabilité dès que le produit arrive, comment dirais-je, à leur niveau. Donc, en fait, il s'agit de mettre en place des systèmes pour limiter, voire éliminer les risques de contamination. L'existence des bonnes pratiques d'hygiène et des bonnes pratiques aussi agricoles. Donc, dans un deuxième temps, nous parlerons bien entendu de la réglementation sur la sécurité environnementale et phytosanitaire. Ceux qui m'ont précédé ont abordé de long en large cet aspect environnemental et phytosanitaire sur, comment dirais-je, les produits que nous transformons, bien entendu. Donc, il y a la protection du café contre l'entrée et la propagation des maladies des caféiers et des ravageurs. Nous avons aussi également la mise en place des systèmes d'analyse et de risques sanitaires afin de déterminer le niveau de risque. Il s'agit de délivrance de certificats phytosanitaires pour les lots à exporter. Donc, la réglementation sur les aspects sociaux et les conditions de travail, c'est aussi un aspect qui est déterminant aussi dans tout l'itinéraire technique de la production et de la transformation. Donc, il s'agit de la santé et la sécurité des travailleurs, le droit des travailleurs, le travail des enfants et l'importance de l'école, logement et conditions, bien entendu, de vie. Et aussi, il s'agit aussi de la discrimination, etc. Mais il y a des défis à relever. Et ces défis sont assez encore contraignants. C'est la nécessité de contrôle de qualité avant exportation pour bénéficier des surcotes sur le café. Et la nécessité également d'assurer un meilleur suivi des statistiques d'exploitation du café en améliorant le système de collecte et de traitement des données. Cette nécessité de suivi aussi du respect des prix fixés pour éviter la surenchère. Également la garantie de financement producteurs et leur organisation, acheteurs et bien entendu exploitateurs. La nécessité d'une meilleure compréhension du marché à terme, marché physique par les acteurs de la filière, surtout les petits producteurs. Vous voyez, après avoir listé toutes ces contraintes, vous comprendrez à quel point aujourd'hui vivre du café devient un véritable problème pour, bien entendu, nos producteurs et même nos transformateurs à la base. Nous avons des propositions, bien entendu, à faire pour les besoins de la situation afin de surmonter les obstacles au commerce du café. Mais vu du côté, bien entendu, de ces petits producteurs que sont les producteurs africains. Ces propositions sont les suivantes. Nous avons deux propositions. La première proposition, il s'agit de renforcer la coopération entre les acteurs pour une production plus vertueuse du café. Et la deuxième proposition, c'est l'instaurer avec nos partenaires commerciaux un cadre inclusif de dialogue. Donc, pour la première proposition, comme je l'ai dit au début de ma présentation, il s'agit de renforcer la coopération entre acteurs pour une production plus vertueuse du café, afin notamment d'améliorer les programmes de recherche et les implémenter dans les pays producteurs, d'améliorer la productivité grâce à l'utilisation d'un meilleur matériel végétal adapté, d'introduire des techniques et des technologies toujours plus adaptées de lutte contre les principaux bioagresseurs des vergers et des productions. Accompagner aussi, bien entendu, les acteurs à la mise en place des modèles durables de production et de consommation à travers l'économie circulaire. La deuxième proposition, bien entendu, comme je l'ai dit au début, c'est d'instaurer avec nos partenaires commerciaux, notamment l'Union européenne, un cadre inclusif de dialogue. Donc, il s'agit pour nous, comme on l'a fait pour le cacao, de mettre en place, si possible, des coffee talks avec la Commission européenne, à l'instar, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, du cacao, qui se tiennent depuis 3 ans pour cette filière cacao. Donc, c'est un aspect essentiel pour permettre certainement de commencer à avoir un début de solution à la problématique causée par la situation que connaît actuellement le café et la réglementation sur le café. Donc, nous pourrons aborder ainsi nos partenaires commerciaux avec les préoccupations cruciales que sont, entre autres, la déforestation. C'est un débat maintenant qui continue à faire couler beaucoup d'encre, mais pour l'instant, qui reste encore assez flou, y compris, bien entendu, la protection de l'environnement. Il y a aussi les questions sanitaires et phytosanitaires et les limites maxi des résidus. Il y a aussi le travail des enfants. Bon, c'est toujours un débat qui continue. Il y a, bien entendu, aussi les réglementations douanières. Je dirais en conclusion, si le modérateur me le permet, le café demeure un produit important, nous le savons, dans le commerce mondial pour les économies de nos pays et pour nos planteurs. Nous avons des économies en développement, bien entendu, et il s'agit pour nous de mettre en place des cadres de travail communs entre producteurs et consommateurs, et également de permettre de prendre en compte les préoccupations de chaque acteur de la chaîne de valeur afin de mieux gérer le complexe de la chaîne d'approvisionnement de cette filière. Les différentes actions que nous préconisons dans ce bref exposé ont pour seul objectif de rendre plus fluides les interactions entre toutes les parties prenantes pour une filière durable et assurer la durabilité de la dite filière. C'est des éléments essentiels pour nous pour pouvoir assurer, bien entendu, la durabilité dans ce secteur d'activité et permettre à ce que, si ces conditions sont réunies, que nous puissions, et beaucoup de prédécesseurs, de ceux qui m'ont présenté l'ont rappelé, veiller à créer un cadre favorable pour un revenu décent pour nos producteurs. Parce que ce débat continue en ce moment. Et si nous ne trouvons pas une solution appropriée face à toute cette réglementation, nous allons progressivement tuer la production à l'origine. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. Gouton, merci. It was a broader point. Now, I think we can jump directly to Mario, who has been very silent. I kept him quiet, but he's a friend, so I can do this. We go now deeper on one of those that, as you see, was also the core of the discussion. Mario,
Yes.
I believe that
Yes,
they will
there should be-
put
yes.
there, and shall I?
Thank you very much. Let me just frame my intervention as being said by our friend. I'm here representing the European Coffee Federation, so everything that I'm going to say is not necessarily my own opinion, but the fundamental idea was, talking about the regulation, of course, was really to inform everybody with, more or less a relatively detailed framework in order to have everybody the same information and being able to discuss on that, avoiding misunderstanding or misconception. But before to do that, I just wanted, with all the other hats I have, and sorry, Gerardo, for this, but I really want to comment on a couple of points, because there are things that from the econometric and economic point of view are actually very interesting. All this debate about prices, about volatility is technically very interesting, but it's very important to settle, the terminology and few other stuff. So, for example, just to set one, are we talking about volatility, as everybody was saying volatility, or are we talking about price level? It's slightly different. So if we're talking about volatility, maybe we can all agree that 100% of us agree on 100 cents per pound. Do we agree? Maybe not. So maybe we are talking about price level, which is okay, no problem, but it's simply to have terminologies. Another question, in the last 2-3 years, we had the international level of prices that went from 1 to 3 and then back to 2, more or less. And unfortunately, we didn't really see the same relationship at the producer level. So this maybe is a question. Why? Why is it not happening? Why the growers are not getting the signal that the market is telling them? Or maybe it's more proper to say why the growers are only getting the bad signals, the signal that we are in overproduction, so the prices are low. Maybe there is some asymmetry of information. Maybe there is some lack of transparency. We should ask also this question to all of us. And last point I wanted to make about changes in blend. Changes in blend are good. All the stories that the roasters are lowering the price of the blend, etc., etc. Okay, I don't want to discuss that. Fine, but please consider that the majority of the choices are done by the final consumer. So in an environment where you might have an economical crisis moment, for example, as we have in Europe or in particular in Italy, in particular situation, the consumer may want to spend less, or in a situation of increases costs and prices, he might want not to spend the additional amount of money. So the only thing he can do is or reduce consumption. So I'm getting 3 coffee a day. Tomorrow I will get 2. So I can, finance the price increase with lower consumption. Or the other thing I can do is to lower, let's say, the quality, but certainly the pricing of my product. And so in that case, if you work on that, on the components of a blend, in terms of Arabica, Robusta, specific qualities, you have an impact and you have a change. And this is the final consumer making the change. And if we don't consider that, again, I'm simply saying these things because we are making a discussion that, to say the least, is not, let's say, sophisticated as it should be. Oh, having said that, I'm sorry, I really apologize with you, but...
You are finalists.
Yeah, no, I don't want to abuse, but again, now let's go back to the regulation. As I said, let's try to explain as much as and the best I can the regulation. So let's go, Gerardo, please. Oh, yeah, thank you. So, well, first slide was about who is ECF, very quick one. ECF is the association representing the European industry, etc., all the countries, all the bigger companies, etc., but also the very fragmented sector that we have in Europe with hundreds and hundreds of roasters, traders, and various operators in the coffee sector. This is the extract of the European official journal where in 31st of May was the regulation approved and published on the official journal. So in Europe, that means that this is a law, is effective, and it just happened that the law says that it will be applied as of 1st of January 2025. So this is the starting point, just a precision, just to be precise. In Europe, this is also good for exports. So if you have to, that means that the 1st of January, you export 1 kilo of coffee and you enter into this regulation. So to export the coffee the 1st of January, you have, of course, to produce it, to roast it, maybe December, maybe November. And if you roast the coffee in, say, November, you should have bought it a little bit earlier and certainly shipped not later than September, October. So basically, we are at 1 year from now, or less than 1 year from now, unfortunately. But this is the case. So another point that we have to bear in mind, and this is, I think, a favor, something that has been forgotten, but is a favor of the European Commission to the countries that have a certain capacity in producing coffee. So that was a comment I was making already in May in Brazil. Here, I think, is also valid. Is a favor also to India that has an important capacity of making soluble coffee, because the soluble coffee will enter straightforward in Europe without any problem. It's not part of the regulation. The timeline is this one, I already anticipated. So 30th of December, 1st of January 25, it starts. There is a small parenthesis for the small and medium enterprises. They will have 6 months more. It's not really too much, but it's a small advantage for the company that have 6 months more to get let's say, ready for the regulation. If you consider that the same as medium more companies have to buy the coffee, most likely, at least the medium one, from the more or less the same channels of supply, in reality, I'm not really sure that they can really take advantage of this 6 months additional timing. Now, what is the essence of the regulation? The EUDR says that coffee produced on area that have been deforested after the 31st December 2020 will not be able to enter into the country, to Europe. And of course, the other requirement is that the coffee has been produced following the regulation of the producing countries. This is in a way normal in terms of human rights and labor rights. There will be new directives, specific directives on human rights, child labor, etc., that will come in the next few months, but it's still, in any case, already there. And this is based on a due diligence statement. So basically, it's a declaration that the importer of the coffee will have to do at the moment of importing it. I'm not really sure if it is the same in all Europe, but at least in Italy, this declaration is something that we already do for other aspects of the import, has to be done at the import moment from the importer to an authority that it can be either the customs or in Italy, most likely there will be the sanitary police. The interesting part of the story is that this is automatically a penal offense if it is not a real one. So I don't know if in other part of the Europe it's an administrative case, but in Italy is a penal one, which is a little bit more serious, of course. So the declaration should say that, of course, you know well, you know yourself, of course, but you also know the coordinates, the point or the points for the polygon of the location where the coffee comes from. And the declaration is that basically all these factors are there, and you, the operator, have done everything to follow that. The due diligence, you can see here, I don't really want to read all of that, but I just want to introduce the concept of risk analysis. There will be two groups of countries. At this moment, we don't know which ones are in one group or the other one, but there will be two groups. One is the group that is basically with all the countries, and the due diligence, the statement has to be done for everybody, etc., etc. But then there will be one group that is considered with additional risk, and there the, let's say, percentage of control, the statistics and the requirements are higher than the second group, which is the low-risk countries that will have a little bit more easy, let's say, procedure to follow. Now, let's just quickly stay on this issue of the geolocalization. Geolocalization per se is not really an incredibly complex issue. It's a question of having either one point or a number of points that, create a polygon. It's a technical issue, but I'd say more or less today, almost everybody with a relatively simple app can do that, even for free, with a telephone, with a smartphone. Having said that, and again, there is a lot of debate about the point or the polygons, but it's not really so relevant, I think, at this stage. What is important is that once we know the point where the coffee comes from, then basically you can confront two pictures, satellite pictures, and in a way, I said in quote, it's easy to say that maybe I have a picture of 31st of December 20 morning, and there was a lot of trees and a big forest in that particular point or polygon, and then I have a picture of yesterday and it's completely deforested. Now, if the coffee comes from that area, of course, will not be able to enter in Europe, etc., etc. Of course, there are technical issues as well, because the satellite pictures are not always the same. You have pictures with 10 meters, let's say, precision, or 20 meters precision, or 3 meters precision, and I would argue that maybe there are some military satellite that can probably see your, the color of your eyes from the space. So, of course, a much smaller sensitivity. There is an issue of interpretation of this picture. What is the cutting or not the cutting? What is the definition of a forest, by the way, which is not such a, let's say, a quiet concept. So there are a lot of technical issues. But one thing that I really want to underline is not really to be, let's say, diverted, not to divert our attention to technical issues that in one way, we all hope that sooner or later it will be improved, it will be solved, it will be more perfect. As I said, making the joke on the satellite precision, that is something that is already on its way, as well as the artificial intelligence for the interpretation of the data, etc., etc. But here the point, in my opinion, is really the weak point is really the connection of this data with the coffee, with the parcel, with the grower, and the information. So the point is that all this, let's say, situation should be linked and carry on with the product. So, in my opinion, the really delicate point is traceability, not necessarily all the others. And my point, I would argue that if we don't have a very good system of traceability that has to also to be democratic, there are the need of other characteristics, not just technically valid, we cannot really accomplish what the regulation, what the law would wish. So European Commission worked with the European Space Agency because of course those are the European experts on satellite. The problem is that the EUSPA is not necessarily the most expert group of people about traceability, about data management, etc. So they are also struggling a little bit with a lot of, let's say, good capability and good intention, but they don't have a pre-digested solution. So they are working on that. We, as the European Confederation, we are also working with them. There have been already few workshops and few occasions, but we are in the process of and not really at the end of the story. Here is where we are. There is another interesting development, which is this deforestation map. As I said before, is a technical issue, but of course is also important. And one of the last development is that the European Commission asked JRC, is the Joint Research Center, which is a center for research for the European community, for the European Commission, to get involved into the definition and the management of the deforestation map. So they are the one that should produce the map at different timing of what is considered deforested, what is not, and how it was in the passage of time. And so therefore, to be able, by confronting two maps, to say, yes, has been deforested, or no, has not been deforested. The EU participated into this platform. I think this is something, as has been said before, we all agree and we all think that is a very important and very positive action to do. Now, this is really too complex. I don't want to enter into that, but just a list of pending things, which in a way we can consider also the next developments that will come. One of the issue is really to have the whole management of the information, starting from the grower up to the end. Just to remember, all of us, we have an incredible problem of definitions. There is not a common definition about the existing systems. So, in principle, a grower is that in one case and something else in another one. So imagine from the point of view of somebody at the end of the chain that should put the information together and maybe add all the information without any form of coherence. It's a bit complex. So definition is not there. Well, of course, benchmarking is a corollary situation, because if we don't have a common definition, also the benchmarking is a bit weak. We are lacking the guidelines that EU should publish, so the accompanying measure guideline and also, let's say, the financing of the implementation of this activity has been promised, but not yet public. So it will come. There is, let's say, in the process, in the legislation, a review that will come in the next 2-3 years to adjust more or less, say, small and not so small issues. For example, the soluble situation that will come later on in order to fix a little bit the whole system. Other commodities will be adjusted, so there will be more impact in other commodities. This is important because if today some of us works also in other products, other commodities, forget to think that you are out of the system. It's just a question of timing. Will be tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, whenever it is, it will come. And the last one is the one that I was already pointing, that is the involvement of the Joint Research Center, which I think is a very important step in order to have a clear and, let's say, stable situation, at least not to open endless discussion on what is the good map, what is not the good one, 10 meters, no 5 meters, no 3, whatever. Okay, so this is it. This is our address. If you need anything, feel free to contact our secretary. We will be very happy to cooperate with all of you, as of course we are to do the same with the European authorities. Thank you very much.
I think, okay, one comment, but very quick, because I want to give to Michel from the European Commission to tell us something.
It's not working? Can you hear me? Okay. No, I just had a comment, because whenever I hear some things, I get nervous. When prices go up to some extent for farmers, the other players in the value chain tend to say, farmers didn't listen, didn't see the signals. They were making a lot of money. That happened in 2020. We are having this whole conversation with our team in New York. And I said, you know, let's compare pears and pears. For those of you who've been in Colombia, we use old Jeeps to transport coffee. We call it Jeepao. Whatever a Jeep can carry is called a Jeepao, an old Jeep, 1950s, 1960s. The equivalent in 2020 was a basic Jeep called the Jeep CJ7. The average price in 1982, when the ICA was renewed until its end in 1989, 1982 was about $130 a pound. The average price per pound in September 2020 was $121. We may be comparing different moments in history and so on and so forth. Let's compare what's comparable. If you're a coffee farmer, and you were to purchase a Jeep CJ7 for your farm, provided you are that prosperous you can buy a Jeep, it would cost you 8,200 pounds, the Jeep, in 1982. If you were to buy the same Jeep in 2020, it would cost you 23,384 pounds, 3 times. So that gives you an idea of the economic situation of the farmer. Fast forward, I just make some quick numbers here. If you go to today, the same Jeep, today as in 5 minutes ago, is $37,000. The coffee today, 5 minutes ago, $149. So the price for the farmer in pounds of Coffeelandia, where pounds of coffee is the currency, is 24,832 pounds of coffee. So, why exactly is that we should be happy when it goes to 2? The 130 in 1982 was equivalent just by inflation, US inflation, dollars, no exchange rates, nothing, US inflation, dollars. Coffee should have been at 341 in 2020. It was at 121. So it goes up to 2. It's still lagging really in a big manner behind. So I don't see why we should be happy with a little increase in prices for a short period of time. That's my quick comment. And then we go to the inflation.
Yeah. No, just...
Well, you have to respond. We are doing a real debate, so...
But yeah, no, I'm very happy. Thank you very much, because now we moved the discussion not to volatility, which is not relevant, but to prices. Absolutely, fine. I agree. Very important.
I think before we enter into this discussion, we have to listen to Michel from the European Commission. You want to respond to this one?
One little last comment.
Yes.
It's nice to want to dream of a price of 341.
I can't hear you.
If we were there, I think the world's largest producing country, Brazil, would be wiping out everyone else. There's competition. The fact of the matter ultimately is, look, why are chips basically, computer chips produced in Taiwan or in China? Or why are clothes produced in Bangladesh? Because they're more efficient. Coffee, unfortunately, is not insulated from that. I'm a big proponent of having geographic diversification. I constantly tell roasters, how many stories are you going to sell to your audience if there are only 2 origins left? You need to continue to invest in promoting and keeping all origins in your blend. You're selling romance and stories about different origins. It's your responsibility to have geographic diversification. So I keep basically promoting that idea to the roasters. But in the end, it's all easy, very easy for, I think, producers to ask for support. But rather sadly, the reality is the higher the support, there are other countries that are more efficient, and Brazil, unfortunately, is one of them. So in my view, we have talked about Brazil and how important it is. I think I want to be at pains to be clear. I admire Brazil. I admire Brazil because they are a big producer, they're efficient, and there are things in my mind to learn from Brazil. Did say earlier today, look, how do we basically overcome this cycle where we have a situation of, high prices followed by very low prices? And the reality of why we have very low prices is because the most efficient producers tend to produce more coffee. And if we've had a price that we've had in the last 2 years, as I think we basically talked about earlier, why aren't origins producing more coffee at the current price? And the sad reality, I think, is you need to become more efficient.
Thank you. I think it's a very good point. But now let's go back and then give the opportunity to make some clarifications on the famous apple pie and the consequences of eating or not. Michel.
Thank you very much, Gerardo. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, fellow panelists. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address the WCC 2023 and in the plenary. I'm very honored. I just want to correct first that I'm not the head of the economic section, but of the sustainability section in the EU embassy in India. And I will therefore speak as a sustainability expert and as a forester, as an agronomist and not as an economist. So please apologies for that. I also took good note of the question on SPS, but I was not prepared to discuss them. I will discuss with colleagues and come back to the question, but thanks for it. I wanted to come back in particular to the very good presentation and slides that Marco presented, and thank you for this. I will first like to underline that the requirements of the EUDR, they apply to the operators who produce in Europe, import to Europe, or export from Europe. They are not laws for the producers or for the farmers. They are laws for ourselves that embody the preference of the EU consumers in a way. The second point I wanted to do is that there are there is no 2 categories, but there are actually 3 categories. The due diligence process and the benchmarking process would basically create 3 categories. The default category, which was already mentioned, a high-risk category if there was a sudden increase or evidence of deforestation happening in a particular geography, but also a low-risk category. And basically, in terms of implementation, the main difference being that the frequency of controls would go from 1% for the least risky provenance up to 9% for the most risky. So that's exactly in practice, the difference is that our member states would implement the EUDR, would just apply higher scrutiny on the higher risk provenance. But then the most important is that the EUDR, which is law, it is already entered into force, and it will enter in application on the 31st December of 2024, and then it will be further fine-tuned, if you will, through different level of reviews, as was mentioned by Mario. So it's already in law, but there is room for, as Mr. Gouton put it, for a framework for dialogue and cooperation. And I think that is the most urgent part, because in the long run, sustainability is not an EUDR problem or an EU problem, it's a world problem. And it was rightly put that the problem of climate change is probably one of the biggest drivers of uncertainty, if not volatility, as regards the production and trade of coffee and any other productions in the future. So I would like to reflect a little more about what can be this framework of cooperation. The regulation itself does not demand that 100% of the farmer or even 100% of producing countries to be certified. It says that it is for the operators to document that the commodity which is imported is legal, is traceable, and has not been grown on land which has been deforested after 2020. These are the requirements. There are requirements on the operators. The means of proof, the means of evidence is something that can be discussed with the producing countries and the producer organizations. And I think indeed that part of the discussion is extremely urgent. Now, personally, I mean, I've been posted in Asia for 8 years, so I may have an Asian perspective that may not apply the same in other geographies. But in my mind, expecting 100% certification down to the farm level in a relatively short period of time is not realistic, and it's not efficient. I think the verification cost associated with 100% verification at farm level could be extremely challenging. But that opens for consideration of other means of proof, like group certification, area-based certification, jurisdictional approaches. I mean, there are a range of options that can be addressed that would allow to certify larger polygons. I mean, the regulation sets the size of the smallest polygon, 4 hectares, but hopefully we would have much larger polygons that would become classified as deforestation-free and therefore classified as low-risk origin. So I think the reflection should really focus on what are the efficient, effective, affordable, inclusive, and pragmatic means to prove traceability, legality, and deforestation-free nature of the products. And for that, indeed, we don't have much time. If we are talking about the SMEs, it's about 2 years or 1.5 years. So we have to work diligently in that direction. And my main message is that we are open for this dialogue with producing country and producing organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I'll give you a few seconds to react, but I want to, give also our distinguished people to interact. So, Trishul, be very short, please.
I think maybe a question for Michael. I think the biggest concern we have is that the world's smallest producers are going to find it the most expensive and will take the longest time to adhere to the EUDR regulation. And the likely impact, very likely and real threat, is that the prices that they get for the coffee is going to be substantially lower, as European roasters are going to be forced to blend out of those coffees if they have the fear that they're not going to be ready. So one specific question, do you think the EU will help producing countries in their efforts to meet the deadline? And the second is, do you think they will extend the deadline once they actually understand that there could be a lot of smaller producers globally negatively impacted by this regulation?
What's this?
Thank you very much for your question. As regards the need and potential for collaboration and help, I think it is even in the regulation itself that there needs to be platforms for such exchange and for identifying issues with demonstrating compliance for all for all producers, not only the smallholders, but including the smallholders. So on the first question, definitely yes. As regards the postponement, I don't think so, no, for the reason that it has been in the making for a very long time. I think we've started working on ways and means for Europe and other to slow, halt and reverse deforestation for more than 15 years, if I'm not wrong. So there will be an implementation that will start depending on the type of supplier between 2024 and mid-2025. So I agree it's a short window, but I don't think that the ministers and the members of the European Parliament will revisit the deadline at such a short notice.
Thank you for the clarification on these two questions about resources and timing. I would like now to give we don't have long time, but I think we have people with the microphone. Please, stand up, say who you are, and make a very, very quick question more than a comment. I was told that there are microphones coming around. Is that the case? There is one person there who would like to make a question. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Manohar. I represent small farmers from Chikmagalur district. In a coffee chain, a farmer's role is a major role because 50% of the producer to produce coffee, it will take almost 50% of the work. When a coffee is sold for example, for 100 rupees, a farmer's share will be only 4 rupees. In that, he has to maintain his estates and all his livelihood. It is very difficult for a farmer to cultivate in this situation. Because of this, in India, already the Arabica coffee production has come down. Question.
So what is the question? Or is a comment?
Sir?
So you mentioned about the low price that the farmers are getting.
I blame the traders, always blame on cost or overproduction to buy cheaper coffee in a cheaper rate from farmers.
So I think the question is, thank you very much, sir. Any other question, and then we try to get an answer.
Yeah, I got a question.
Please.
Okay, and this question is to Mr. Mandana. I think the skew between Robusta and Arabica, 5 years back, I think I'm a farmer from Chikmagalur, we experienced this, and it's again coming. So I heard what you said. What I'm trying to understand is it taste that roasters are heading towards Robusta, or is it price? And if it is price, they say at high prices you enjoy and at low prices you endure it. So maybe we got to endure it for another 2 years. So that's my question to you.
Thank you. Second question. Can I just wait for a third one and then we can reply? I know this was addressed to you. The other one also was engaging with traders. Anybody else? I can't see. Yes. Gentlemen, and then we try to recap.
Yeah.
Please introduce yourself.
Mohan Kumar. I'm the president of Karnataka Coffee Growers Federation. I'm representing 98% small growers. My question is, in the value chain, by traceability, is there any benefit to the producers? And the second thing is, in the value chain, the total ultimate, the profitability is very low for the producer. So how we are managing is there any benefit by traceability to the producer? That is my question.
Thank you. You start.
To answer the question from the gentleman at the back, what we're basically seeing here is that the roasters reacting to the consumer need for a cheaper product. And essentially what is happening here is, the consumers feeling the bite, if you will, of a recessionary sort of environment. Personally, I'm finding it very hard to understand, because I was making the comment to one of my colleagues the other day. Everywhere you seem to go on holiday, or every plane you seem to fly seems to be full. So why can't the consumer afford a decent cup of coffee is the question. And the answer that one of the roasters gave me, he says, look, this modern consumer
Can you get
wants to
these
spend
questions?
more on experiences,
the
in other
price
words, holidays,
I'd be happy
more
to
than
if you could.
on some of his life's essentials, including a good cup of coffee. So this whole move of being driven into, let's say, more robustas, I think is the reaction of the roasters catering to a client that seems to want a cheaper cup of coffee, not necessarily a better cup of coffee. My personal hope is that once we're out of that recessionary environment, that the consumer will begin to understand and taste or want a good cup of coffee again. The other thing which doesn't help is roasters tend to promote their own brands. They don't tend to promote origins. So as such, as long as that dynamic exists, the consumer doesn't really know that he needs to ask for a nice Kenya or a nice India or a nice Colombia. So that's another problem. So
Okay, I won't just, sorry, I'll just make a quick point. Mr. Mandana, so as of today, using Juan's point, Robusta, and this is specific to Indian farmers, as of today, Robusta and Arabica have pretty much reached equilibrium in price. Is that the case only in India, or worldwide, in Brazil, they're still catching up of Robusta to go to get an Arabica to fall down?
I mean, I have seen something very bizarre which I've not seen in my 30-year career. We saw for a brief moment people or roasters paying more for Robustas than the cheapest Brazil Arabicas. I think, in my opinion, that's a temporary phenomena. It's something that is going to change, and I think, in my mind, it's not permanent.
Okay, thank you. Can you elaborate on the price on the first questions as well? I think you go there because the microphone doesn't work.
Contrary to what Trishul said, I think there is a market for Robusta. Good Robustas have always been popular in the Italian market. So I think the Italian consumer drinks Robusta because he likes it and not because it's less expensive than an Arabica. So I think the market exists for both the varieties, Arabica and Robusta. We seem to forget that India produces, our production is 70% Robusta and 30% Arabica. Moving on to Mohan Kumar's question about certification and so on. See, track and trace is here to stay, whether it is because of the roaster requiring or because of the regulations coming under EUDR. I know it adds to the cost of the farmer, and usually the farmer may not be rewarded with a better price due to track and trace. But it looks like track and trace is inevitable and it is going to stay. So whether you certify or don't certify, you're still, the buyer is going to insist that he can know where your coffee is. They talked about, I think Mario Arnold mentioned the geolocation of the coffee. So it's all going to add to your costs. Finally, the cost gets passed down the chain, and it's unfortunate that the grower has to bear it. So, you know, you don't have to go for an official certification as such. Probably in India, we can ask the coffee board to create a system of tracking these coffees. But I think tracking coffee is here to stay and cannot be avoided. Addressing what they said about EUDR as well, if you don't, if you permit, you know, and adding to what Juan said about going to heaven, I think modifying the Abbott's saying, the road to heaven is paved with good intentions, but bad ideas. So all of us do want sustainability, we want forests, and India particularly, are very careful in protecting our forests. But the devil is always in the details. So, as he said, the law has passed. We cannot change the law. Problem is going to be in the details, but again, your issue of traceability will come in. So I think,
Okay.
It's here.
Thank you. Michael.
Sorry. It was not.
Is it working?
Sorry, it was not at all my intention to interrupt. I think you are very right that you can only learn by doing, and the reason I point out that we still have time is because the law has passed, but there will be something called an implementing act that will come before, of course, the legislation enters into application. And that implementing act has not been published yet. So there is still room for discussion as to how is the most effective, efficient, pragmatic way to do it. With regards to the question of the gentleman on whether it can be profitable for the growers, if it is indeed the case that they capture 4% of the value of the coffee, I don't see why they would necessarily bear 100% of the cost of traceability or sustainability. Quite the opposite. I think whatever the cost, it should be fairly shared between the consumer, the producers, and everyone in between on the value chain. I think that would be the logic. Now, how do we achieve that, I think, is the question.
Thank you, Michael. Mario.
Yes, no, just a quick comment from a roasting point of view. The regulations has a fine of 5% of sales. Not profit, not the dollar, not euros, nothing. 5% of sales of the group worldwide. So, very quickly for a medium roaster or large, whatever it is, we are really talking about hundreds of millions dollar fine. And when I want to make a joke, trying to be hilarious on something that is unfortunately very serious, I say it's like when I park the car in second line, which you cannot do it, and I normally in Italy get a fine of about 37 euros, is that instead of doing that, they blow the car with all the people inside. So this is more or less something that instead of 30 of a normal fine, the authorities decided to blow the car with everybody in. So, to say the least, my opinion is that it's a little bit excessive as a fine. But this is the regulation. And by the way, again, we should imagine that we are here talking on something that, yeah, we can modify, hopefully, in some details, but the law is the law, so it's there. So from a certain point of view, it's almost ridiculous to talk about something that is not going to change, no? But anyway, so the point is, from the starting point, from a roster point of view, considering that the fine can actually break the company if you only get one, and two, or three, or five, is not, this is for every lot imported. So again, just to give you an idea, a company like Lavazza is importing about 2,000 lots of coffee per year. So if we take a 2 or 3 fine, it's gone, it's finished. We are better to give the company to the European authority. So of course, the risk analysis will tell us, from a managerial point of view, a big responsibility to our shareholders, to our company, we have to reduce as much as we can the risk. So how do you do that? So, okay, you can play the game and say, no, don't worry, nothing will happen. 1st of January will be postponed, or somebody will tell us that it's a joke, or somebody will tell us that, oh, no, it's not 5%, it's 5 euros. Okay, 5 euros, we can afford to pay the fine. But if these things do not happen, and as a manager, my responsibility is to manage with the freedom that I can. So what is the only thing that we can do now? Is to make very quickly a risk analysis, and the risk being the countries that will be ready or the countries that will not be ready, the growers that will be ready or the growers that will not be ready, and build our blends in a fashion that we will minimize that risk. Meaning, again, that if at the end of the story only Brazil and Vietnam will be ready to in a way, to offer information and data that we can based on, we will have to do it. Simply because it doesn't work to take a risk of 150 million euros, which is 5% of our sales. What for? For blend variability, which is of course a paramount importance. Because if in the world all of us will drink one type of coffee only, the consumption will probably be 1/3 or 1/4 of what it is today, because the variability of taste is one of the bases of the consumption that we had, which is, by the way, always growing steadily, 1.5%, etc., etc. So it's a very good market from that point of view. No, but this is also due to the fact that we can have different types of coffee. We can have the Robusta type of coffee. We can have the specialty coffee. We can have the soluble. We can have many, many ways of drinking our product. And that makes an incredible richness, which would be killed simply because there is no possibility of managing this risk. The only way to manage the risk is to change blend to minimize it, or the other way around, to imagine, let's say, very fantastic solution from the point of view of making the declaration. So, okay, there are ways of using other maybe companies based on other countries, all sorts of things that will happen. And as usually in these things,
very passionate intervention. You wanted to say something? Or? Okay, look, we are about to finish, but if you allow me, I just want 1 minute question answered by all of them. You have a magic wand. We know there are a lot of challenges in trade. What would you use the magic wand for? But just really one thing. What would you do if you have the magic wand and you can solve a challenge of the coffee trade? It's a difficult question, but I wanted to know because we heard so many, about the difference between one origin, diversification, the problem, okay, climate change, the changing regulatory framework. Things are becoming more complex. We understand the decision is made by roaster, not by the farmer, by the consumers. We look about traceability, we look about mechanisms to solve this that were proposed. But now you have the magic wand. What do you do, Ramesh? It's not working. His microphone, it doesn't never work. We get one. Use that one.
I think the biggest problem the trade faces is with regulations.
Right. Okay.
So if I had a magic wand, I would remove all these restrictions.
You will remove the regulations?
Yeah, I think it should be, quality is very clear. Quality is something between the producer and the buyer. It's final, the buyer sees it, he likes it, it's there. Now in between we have, between the grower and the roaster, you have the whole chain of regulations starting from producing country right till the end.
So he eliminates all the regulations. So can we adapt also to drinking, driving, everything? No regulations.
No, not that. Okay, you have to drive. You can't have everybody driving on whichever side of the road you want. You need minimum, those are regulations that meet trade regulations, not...
Okay. Now, Mario, let's make it a
We all want the objective. We started 4 years ago a deforestation-free coffee project and activity with the government of Ecuador. So this is out of question. I don't want to discuss my attitude to that. But the point is we have to stop everything and start, unfortunately, from zero. Starting from zero means, first of all, let's talk with the coffee producer, let's talk with the coffee user, and having very clear the objective, which I think nobody disagree, we have to find workable and effective solutions.
Okay, thank you. Amit.
I think build capacity and capability at the weakest level first. Coffee is just too precious to be left to two origins, right?
Yes.
If it's two origins in the end, it's just not worth having any of these things,
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
So it's just too precious. We have to move beyond this bipolar world of coffee, right? And build capacity and capability.
Then,
I would introduce more regulation. And the regulation I would introduce is to force all the world's roasters to tell us where they're buying coffee from. Just like the manufacturer of a shirt in India, when he exports to Europe, he has to say where it's made. The European roasters and the world's roasters are under no obligation to tell us where they're manufacturing and producing coffee from. And the day that happens, I think you'll find that the world's environmentalists will be putting pressure on roasters to diversify the origination and help
you
the
address
world's
this.
farmers.
okay. That's one point of view. Now,
Let me just-
let's see your magic wand.
Just one final comment, if microphone works. No, I agree with everything that was said and with anything that was said. but basically, whatever is done with more or less legislation, with more or less information, which I agree with that. If we continue down this path, this is going to be to hit directly the smallholder coffee farmer. And that's one of the biggest concerns. I don't know if you haven't had the chance to see it. Professor Jeffrey Sachs in Columbia University made a study where he says two very interesting things. One is the way things are going, small coffee holder farmers are going to disappear or are going to suffer a lot. And there was a few years ago with working with the World Coffee Producers Forum. And the second thing is he proposed something that at the time, and this was presented in Brazil in 2019, people said, you know, that's kind of crazy, this idea. To have like this global coffee fund that will be funded by the industry to help farmers cope with climate change and to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change. People said, you know, this is undoable. I was very happy to hear, I think it was Andrea Ili who said that. A very similar idea. If one was Andrea, my apologies, but I think it was Andrea. And saying, you know, we need to fund this initiative, we need to fund climate mitigation, adaptation. And who has the funds? Traders and mostly roasters and retailers. Because farmers certainly do not have the funding, and they are the ones suffering the worst consequences. I invite you all to look at, again, the climate change patterns which happen in the tropical belt between in the equator line, where coffee-producing countries are located. Thank you.
That's
So if I have a magic wand, so for all the products which I am selling in the market, I would like to make full traceability of all the materials going into it, right up to the origination of the plantations and the smallholders, with the ultimate objective that we've all been talking about smallholders today, that I want to make a positive impact on the lives of the smallholders. So that's, if I have a magic wand, that's the most direct impact which I would like to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur Gouton. Yes, very close. Yeah. Just one mic comment. Vas-y.
Oui. En fait, je vais parler français avant.
Ouais.
Je disais justement qu'en fait, il n'y a pas de solution magique parce que nous sommes nous-mêmes les magiciens de ce que nous faisons. Alors, parler d'une solution magique, ce serait peut-être utopique, surtout pour les producteurs qui sont le maillon faible de la chaîne ici, là. Il y a eu beaucoup d'intervenants aujourd'hui, beaucoup d'interventions bien sûr sur les différents problèmes liés à la production, à la transformation, à la commercialisation et à tous les impacts qui affectent tout l'itinéraire technique et commercial. Il y a bien entendu aussi le problème de la déforestation, etc. Vous savez, tous ces problèmes qui se posent actuellement sur la filière font que aujourd'hui, pour vraiment être magicien, je crois qu'il faut faire appel à un secours au plus important, faire appel à Dieu. Or, nous voyons ici que même Dieu est fatigué de tous ces problèmes qui se posent actuellement au niveau de cette population qui souffre au jour le jour de ce qu'il produit, qu'il ne consomme pas, ou ce qu'il consomme et qu'il ne produit pas. Voyez, donc pour conclure encore à nouveau, je dis la solution en réalité c'est une concertation entre tous les acteurs de ces filières, de ces matières premières. Parce que s'il n'y a pas une concertation inclusive, je pense qu'il n'y aura pas de magie.
Merci, merci. Michael Michel.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I don't think it takes a magic wand to fix the current challenge. I mean, if I had a white magic wand, I would like everybody to be safe and healthy, yes. and that we would be protected of the worst consequences of climate change and biodiversity loss. That would be my choice. Now, if we were to solve the situation of coffee in India, in particular, I mean, talking to an Indian audience in large part, I think India is very well placed because already in India you have very strong public digital infrastructures in place. So it's possible with very minimal cost to identify people, to connect to their phone number, to their bank account, and to a large extent it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to imagine that you could connect it to a farm. And once you have that data infrastructure in place, making it a transparent system is not rocket science. I mean, it has been done in other geographies, maybe not at that scale, but I think the basis, the technical basis of making the supply chain more transparent, more easy to trace, and to attach ESG performance, not only deforestation, but ESG performance to the production and trade of all commodities is probably the way of the future, irrespective of regulation, because that's what the consumers want. They want to be sure that they are not complicit of social or environmental harm.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the participants for this very rich, interesting, complex, and passionate discussion. And just I can quote Juan Esteban, the only solution to go to heaven without dying is to have a cup of coffee. Do you agree? Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
I request you to kindly stay back for a moment. Yeah. How can we leave the esteemed delegates without felicitating them? I would request the Joint Director Research of Coffee Board, Mr. Naveen Behel Rintatiang, to kindly felicitate. First of all, I would request Mr. Gerardo Pataconi to kindly come forward. Gerardo, kindly come forward. Sorry. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together. It was a very engaging session in terms of keeping us totally engrossed. Thank you very much, Mr. Gerardo Pataconi. Thank you very much. I would now request Mr. Trishul Mandana, the Managing Director of Wall Cafe, to kindly come forward. Thank you, Mr. Trishul, the Managing Director of Wall Cafe. I would now like to call upon Mr. Juan Esteban Ordaz, President of the Colombian Coffee Federation. Mr. Esteban. Thank you, Mr. Juan Esteban Ordaz, the President of the Colombian Coffee Federation. Now I would like to call upon Mr. Mandeep Singh Tuli, the Procurement Head, Nutrition and Ice Cream, South Asia, Unilever. Thank you, Shri Mandeep Singh Tuli, for your presence and participation in the panel. I would now like to call upon Mr. Amit Pant, the Senior Vice President of Tata Coffee, to kindly come over. Mr. Amit Pant. Thank you, Mr. Amit Pant, the Senior Vice President of Tata Coffee. I will now like to call upon Mr. Marlo Cerruti, the Chief Institutional Relations and Sustainability Officer, Lavazza Group. Mr. Ramesh Raja, the President of the Coffee Exporters Association of India. Thank you very much, Shri Ramesh Raja, for your presence and participation in the panel discussion. The President of the Coffee Exporters Association of India, Bengaluru. Dr. Anselme Gautam, the President of African and Madagascar Robusta Coffee Agency, ACRAM, Togo, to kindly come over. Thank you, Dr. Anselme, for your presence and presentations and comments and remarks. Thank you. Dr. Michael Boki, the Counselor, Head of Section, Delegation of the European Union to India. Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you. Now I request all the panelists to kindly come forward. Sir, be there. All of you together for a photograph. With the memento, please, with the memento. You can carry the memento with you and then come for a photograph. In the meantime, please note there is one more session after this, but after that, at 6 p.m. onwards, there is a musical evening. The Coffee Board, Government of India would invite all the delegates, sponsors and exhibitors to this musical evening. Please pass on the message. Some of you might have gone out. Please tell them that there is a musical evening at 6 p.m. followed by a heartfelt thanksgiving to our sponsors. So please take a quick break for about 8 to 10 minutes and then come back so that the next session will start at 4:30. Thank you very much and all of you take care. Do come back quickly.